I think I found my favorite combination of a single camera, lens, and stabilizer for solo wedding filmmaking, and I think this exact setup might work for many of you, so let's get started. Alright, so I'm going to start by telling you the gear that I've been using for the past year and then explaining what gear I've added and why I've added it. So for my camera body, I've been shooting with the Sony a7 III. For the lens, it's been the Sony FE 28mm f2.0 lens. I chose this lens because it was relatively inexpensive. It had a fast f-stop. It was a semi-wide lens. It was a good option when I was switching from Canon to Sony. And for my stabilizer, I've been using the GlideCam XR Pro, so that has been my setup. Spoiler alert, I am still using the Sony a7 III. I really love it for wedding filmmaking. The autofocus, 120 FPS, low light, dual card slots, picture profiles, battery life, customizable menus, full frame, image quality, weight, donuts, coffee, puppies, kittens, rainbows. I mean, it's really just got the whole package. So the number one problem that I wanted to change was being relegated to a 28mm lens. I could push into about 41mm with my APS-C crop mode on my Sony a7 III, so I did have some extra focal length there, but I was missing a lot of the detail and facial expressions when I couldn't get close enough to the couple or whoever it was that I was shooting, and it was taking away from the human emotional element of the film. A lot of times I was able to get closer to get some of that, but much of the time I just wasn't able to. But I also didn't just want to add another prime lens, so I'd have to be switching lenses throughout the day, especially because I'm on a GlideCam and I use that GlideCam all day long. I just wanted one single lens that I could use the entire day. I love the simplicity and the efficiency of that. So I decided to get a zoom lens, the Tamron 28 to 75mm f2.8 lens. I shot a wedding film using this lens last weekend and I loved it. So why did I choose this lens in the first place? So number one, I was looking for a 24 to 70mm lens because I knew that would cover any focal length I would ever need to shoot in on the wedding day, but those lenses are pretty expensive. So the Tamron 28 to 75mm is close enough to the 24 to 70 focal length, and for me, I can sacrifice that extra 4mm on the wide end to get a quality lens that's under $900. So here's an example of the amount of range I can get with this lens. And on the 75mm side, I can use APS-C crop mode on the Sony a7 III to push in even further, giving me a 112mm focal length. It's just amazing. And then it has an f2.8 aperture, which is fantastic for a telephoto lens at this price, and it's a constant minimum aperture, so you can go all the way down to 2.8 no matter what focal length you're shooting at. Some zoom lenses only let you go down to 3.5 or 4 once you get to the longer end of your focal length, but not this one. It works great with the Sony a7 III. There are no autofocus problems. It works just as well as my Sony lens did. It's also really light, which is great for running gun wedding filmmaking, as well as having the camera on my GlideCam. And then at the end of the day, the video just looks good. All right, so we talked about the camera and the lens and showed you some examples, but you're probably wondering how a telephoto lens is going to work on a GlideCam. Won't you have to rebalance each time that you zoom the camera? And the answer is yes and maybe. That's like the most confusing answer of all time, but hear me out. So for the wedding that I had last weekend, my new stabilizer had not come in yet, which we'll talk about in a second. So I was shooting in the GlideCam XR Pro. So I had it balanced for my 28mm focal length on my camera, so that's what it was evenly balanced at. So if I wanted to zoom in, it would make it front heavy. So I did two things during the wedding day. I either just went handheld with it, so I just kind of held the GlideCam and got those longer focal length shots handheld, or I still just moved around with my front heavy GlideCam and made it work. It actually turned out surprisingly better than I thought. One advantage though that I have is that I like to shoot in slow motion, so any of the shakiness that was in there is harder to see when you're shooting in slow motion. But because my camera was tilted down, I really had to kind of hold on to it to bring it back and not just have a light touch on the post there. I was really having to hold it to bring it back and then moving back and forth. So there was a little less stabilization there, but I just had to make it work the best I could. But the reason I wouldn't just rebalance on the GlideCam XR Pro, there are two knobs on each side I would have to unscrew, and then I would have to move the whole head of this thing back and forth and make sure that it was correct. So I'd have to unscrew, move it ever so slightly, and then check it, and then unscrew and then move it ever so slightly and then check it again, and that's just way too tedious. It takes a lot longer to balance that thing. So in order for me to quickly rebalance if I'm changing my focal length, I purchased the GlideCam HD Pro. So why does this GlideCam solve my problem, and why didn't I choose an electronic gimbal? Those are great questions. You guys are really good at questions. So I didn't choose an electronic gimbal because I didn't want to drop the cash. I like the way that the GlideCam looks and feels and the use of it. I've already learned how to use it. And I love that the GlideCam is only based on physics and not on electronics and motors and stuff like that. Maybe I'm paranoid about that stuff not working and needing more batteries and all that stuff, but I love that this is just tried and true. But a GlideCam is just simpler and easier for me to use now that I've already learned how to use one. But if you're all about those electronic gimbals, I've heard phenomenal things about the Zhiyun Crane 2, as well as the DJI Ronin S. So I'll go ahead and link those both in the description below for you. But why does the GlideCam HD Pro solve our problem? The number one reason I purchased this one is because the knobs on the side are so much easier to rebalance this thing. So if I'm going to zoom in, it's going to make my balance more front heavy. So you can see that it protrudes there, so it's going to make it more front heavy. In order for me to rectify for that, all I need to do is turn one knob at the back to influence the forward and backward balance of the GlideCam. I don't even need to touch the one that's on the side that goes for the horizontal balance. So all I need to do is worry about this front and back knob. And as I continue to use the GlideCam and change the focal lengths up, I'll be faster at being able to find how much I need to crank that knob in order to get the right balance. So I just got this thing today. So on my first day, let's see how long it takes me to go from a perfect balance at 28 millimeters to rebalancing this thing at 75 millimeters. All right, so I am all green on my GlideCam at 28 millimeter focal length. So if I want to zoom in here, I want to get a longer focal length during the wedding day. How long is it going to take me to then rebalance to get an even balance on my GlideCam? So first time, here we go. 1, 2, 3. I'm all green. At the very end, I had a very minor adjustment to make. I just did like a half turn. Before I did 4 big turns, and then I did maybe 1 more turn and then a half turn. That is very close. That is very minute. And the side to side, I want to be perfect for sure, but the front to back, to me, isn't nearly as pivotal, because if you're watching, you're gonna notice if there's some side to side, like the screen looks tilted. But front to back, like you may have a little bit more of a forward balance, but if it's really slight, it's not gonna make that much of a difference. No one watching is gonna notice. So I can really quickly go ahead and rebalance this thing in between shots. I can just go crank, 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 and then be pretty good. And then when I wanna bring it back, I can do the same thing. And then if I have a little extra downtime, I can make sure it's perfect, but I know I can get it really close really fast. And then if there are times when I just wanna zoom in and go handheld, I can, and not even change the balance. But I have options. I can rebalance quickly and get those nice moving shots with my GlideCam. I can do handheld. I can just stay wide. I have lots of different options to get multiple types of shots, way more than I could before. Another thing about this GlideCam is I love the ease of use. So there are markings, I don't know if you can see this, there are markings that are on the edge here, and there are numbers, and it lines up with this little etch right here. So I didn't create this etch, this was created already. So I know that the center of weight on this setup for my lens and my camera is at the number 8. So I just go ahead and stick it right where that notch is. And I learned that it was 8 by putting this whole setup and the quick release plate on a pen and rolling it to see where it would kind of tilt. And when it was the most balanced in the middle, that was the number that I knew was the center of weight. So I stuck it right there, and that makes sure you're gonna have the right center of gravity over the pole here. So I know right when I put my camera on, boom, line up the 8 with the notch, good to go. So another thing too, I like being able to spread out the base here. This is as wide as it goes, and that helps you from swinging around too much. My GlideCam XR Pro has a pretty small base. It's not as wide or long, so that helps it from swinging around and gives you extra stabilization. So now you might be wondering, can you get stable GlideCam footage when you have your lens all the way out to 75 millimeters? So here are a couple examples of me doing just that. 24 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 120 frames per second. Just shows you what that looks like, because typically we say you want to use a wider lens on a GlideCam so you can get those big sweeping shots. But if you wanted to get some camera movement with a longer focal length, I just want to let you know that that's possible. You can do it with some practice. So with this setup, I have a fantastic camera, a versatile all-in-one lens, and a great stabilizer that allows me to use all the functionality of this lens. So like I said before, this setup just gives me a ton of options that I did not have before. So I'm shooting 2 weddings the next 2 weekends, so I will be using this setup, so be sure to keep an eye out for those so you can see how it looks. If you're not already subscribed and you're into the art and business of video creation with an emphasis on wedding filmmaking, then consider subscribing. We'd love to have you here. It's been great to see progress and growth of people who've been watching the channel, and it's also been great for me to grow alongside of you all. So I invite you to hop on board if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. See you all in the next video.